This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, perfect. Here we go. Well, thank you everybody so much for joining us on a dramatic day, even more dramatic than we thought it might be when we started to put this together. So, there's myself, CEO of BlondeMoney. We have our Northern Ireland expert, BallyMoney, here to talk about the various machinations involving the DUP. And firstly, let us crack on with the concept of this meaningful vote. Of course, as we found out today, at the very last minute, it looks like this is going to be pulled, although the mechanism for doing it is a little bit complicated. We do, of course, have a statement coming from the Prime Minister in an hour and a half. We don't expect too much from that. This is the woman who famously declared the morning after she'd not done too well in that election last year, you know, nothing has changed. So I don't think she'll be saying an awful lot in that statement other than in the national interest, it is for the good of the people, that we take some more time to get to where we need to go to. However, it's still important for us to look at the shape of Parliament because the vote itself doesn't really change much about that, and if anything, it makes everybody's positions more entrenched and more difficult for anything to happen. I would say the reason for pulling the vote, there are 3 points on this that we will look at today as well. One, clearly they felt the fall of the government was a significant possibility. Two, time is against them, and we'll look at the timeline for Brexit. Things need to be resolved way before March. And three, they're working on an alternative. So we'll come into those 3 points as we go through, but the parliamentary vote arithmetic. Now, this is our BlondeMoney team of analysts and interns, and we had a great week last week going through every single MP and putting them down as to where they may or may not vote on this Theresa May's deal. And these are the numbers that we came up with, and these numbers are still very relevant because at some stage there will still have to be some kind of vote on a deal of some kind. So this is what we came up with, and the very big chart at the top shows you the mountain of course that the government had to climb, with 397 against and 98 who are maybe against. That is a staggeringly difficult set of numbers for any Prime Minister, let alone on something as important to the future of the country as this vote. Now, if we drill into the Conservatives specifically, we had 66 definitely against, 32 probably against, and 8 who were perhaps against. And that's aside from the general maybes who had either not declared or weren't sure one way or the other. This leaves us, this bottom left corner table, the loss for the government from their own party. Our central scenario was 98 MPs voting against. In a best world, it would have been 66. And in a worst case scenario, if all of the maybes and the against went against her, 173. That, of course, is a dreadful way to be looking at anything. And I think what is important about these numbers, as we look at them today versus 10 days ago, when we knew that the vote was going to be held, they haven't really shifted towards the government's favour. If anything, they've shifted against. We've had more coming out and declared against than we have flipping the other way. There have been some flipping the other way, but of course, there have been some resignations from ministers. So momentum is really important in politics. It's the thing that propelled Donald Trump into power, and the thing that propelled Macron into power. There comes a point at which the momentum is just, it goes above and beyond reason, really. It's never about, you know, the whips have apparently been trying in vain to get these people back on side, but they just couldn't do it. They just didn't have enough momentum against the people who were against it. So those were the numbers that we were looking at for the vote, and they're still relevant because those people who are against it, I mean, there are a number of reasons why. One of the big ones is the backstop. which we are going to come back to. But it shows the schism within the Conservative Party. There is, by the way, a schism within other parties as well, particularly the Labour Party, on the concept of Europe, but they are interested in, of course, getting their hands on the levers of power rather than necessarily just passing this vote. So those are the numbers. What are the next steps? And remember, as I say, even if this vote doesn't happen, it'll have to happen at some point, and the next steps are the same next steps, whatever happens. They are 3 points of process. Number 1, a renegotiation. As we said, there are a number of MPs who have cited the backstop as a reason that they can't go for this deal. And they say, you know, it's because it's not even necessarily that they're particularly a unionist, although most members of the Conservative and Unionist Party are unionists. It's the idea that there is no unilateral ability to exit falling into the backstop. Of course, meaning that MPs have to tell their constituents, okay, we're probably going to get to something better, but, you know, at the end of the day, we might get tied into something we can never get out of. However, the numbers who are against purely just the backstop is 45. That even if this backstop gets removed or amended or changed, there's still a lot of people who were against the deal anyway, and 45 doesn't make that much of a dent, even in our best case scenario of 66 MPs who are against it. Second thing that could happen is the Conservative leadership challenge, and the third is a government no confidence vote. The reason we haven't had this leadership challenge on the Conservatives is that each part of the party cannot agree on who the next leader should be, and they're all worried that if, for example, Boris Johnson is put up by the Brexiteers, then there will become an anyone but Boris from the Remainers/pragmatists who are left in the party, and that therefore it would lead to splitting in the vote, and both sides, Brexiteer and Remainer, are so nervous that their candidate won't get that momentum and won't win, that they only want to go for that if they know they're going to win it. On the government no confidence vote, this mechanism has changed since the Fixed Term Parliament Act in 2010, but of the 31 no confidence votes that have been brought since the Second World War, there's only one that's been successful. Famous one, 1979, prior to Thatcher taking over, but that was a long time ago, as our new interns happily remind me, given that they barely even remember the financial crisis. So it has been a very long time since a no confidence vote was used successfully. And added to this, the Labour Party are split. We have our own, we've created an index of the opinion towards Corbyn by Labour MPs. We have various criteria, independent criteria we've looked at, and we have a scale of pro and anti-Corbyn sentiment. And 55% of the Labour Party are anti-Corbyn. So there's a slight issue there that the Labour Party, though they might want power, may not necessarily want Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister if they win it. So there are some issues there with the Labour Party, and they have talked about going for a censure motion instead. A little bit of technicalities there, but a censure motion can just be used to literally censure a politician. Much like the government was found in contempt, this would be censuring the Prime Minister. Historically, they've had their salaries reduced and things like that. I don't quite know what would happen for the PM, but it means, importantly, for Labour, that the DUP could back a censure motion, but it wouldn't technically break their confidence and supply agreement with the government. And we are going to come to the DUP and how important they are. So those are all the different mechanisms, but they're only mechanisms to be used by people who are now looking to drive this in the direction they want it to go. So the next steps will really depend on the choice of goal for Parliament. The choice of the weapon depends on the choice of goal. So do you want a no confidence vote or a second referendum or crash out with no deal? That depends on who you are and how you feel about how this process should be going and where you want to end up. We've just given you there 6 examples of different factions who are all split into different ways on what they want. The extreme Remainers now know they can revoke Article 50 thanks to the ECJ ruling, but the extreme Brexiteers know that as time ticks by, we move irrevocably towards a no-deal exit. Then you have more pragmatic points of view, looking for things like Norway or Canada, and then you have the expedient perspective. If you're Labour and you just want power, or you're the SNP and you want a Scotland vote, again, you'll do anything just to have some kind of mayhem from which you can grab what it is that you want. At the moment, we are in the all pieces are up in the air, they're landing back down, and there's no majority for anything. You will hear a lot, there's no majority for no deal. There's no majority for revoking Article 6. There's no majority for this. There's no majority for that. There's no majority for anything. If you think of it quite broadly as there are three of us in the room, and you want choice A over me, and I want my choice over this person, and they want their choice over this person, it's one of those classic kind of logical dilemmas where none of us will give way to the other one because we fear something more than what we really want to get. So that's where you can't rule anything out. The chances of no Brexit, of no deal, and of some kind of Norway and Canada type agreement, they're all on the table. And basically what we're looking for is the Messiah to emerge. We don't know if he's called Brian or not, but somebody has to emerge to save this. I often say in politics, it's Clark Kent versus Superman. Nobody would vote for Clark Kent to be president of the world. Everybody would love it to be Superman, because doesn't he always turn up right at the moment where it looks disastrous and saves the day? If you go too early, you're just a wrecker. You're the baddie of the piece. But if you can swoop in with what most people want you to do, then you can end up as the saviour of the world. And the Grieve Amendment makes this more likely, because it basically said that if Plan A doesn't work, it's no longer up to the government to deliver Plan B. It's up to Parliament. But we've just said Parliament is completely split over what Plan B should be. So it's just making the stalemate and the crisis more likely to happen. Now, just a procedural point. If this vote doesn't ever get properly voted on and the withdrawal agreement doesn't go through on this round, then the Grieve Amendment itself may not be valid, because it's an amendment to a vote that never got voted on. We will get to that. So I'm going to finish in a second on the timeline, and then we're going to talk about the Irish border and why that is a key question about all of this. So we've got the next steps, what could be used, the next steps of factions within Parliament, and the clock is ticking. Now on this, we've got the meaningful vote is 11th of December. We've got the EU Council Summit. We've also got when the House of Commons rises and returns for its joyous Christmas break. But, and this may well be part of why they're trying to delay this vote, if the meaningful vote fails, the government has to make a statement of its intentions within 21 calendar days. That would have meant, if it were going through tomorrow, that by the 1st of January, they would have to come back with a statement. That would also mean by the 21st of January, that it'd have to be a deal presented to Parliament. And if ultimately by the 29th of January, the House of Commons must debate and vote on a motion based on the government's statement, and if that were defeated, the UK leaves with no deal. This is what the Brexiteers, in a sense, sort of cling on to in terms of how the timeline works in their favour. So basically, as soon as that meaningful vote happens, the clock starts on this process, the 21 calendar days, and then the further sitting days and calendar days until we get to the 29th of January. Now, of course, delaying it doesn't necessarily help you too much, because we're still going to leave technically on the 29th of March. So that rolling forward, that endless, inexorable process to a destination will happen, whatever comes up. But of course, having a bit more time might allow you to win over some more people, do some deals in terms of those factions of who wants what, machinations, etc., that might mean you start to play people off against one another, and that might be slightly what they're planning on doing. And I've just put at the bottom of this slide a point that we often talk about: how long would it take to get new prime minister, a new government, a new election? there is time to do some of these things, but time is running out. So the time for a Conservative leadership contest is very tight. Of course, they could come up with a caretaker leader and say we'll have the vote ultimately once we're out of the way of Brexit. Okay, a general election contest, 17 days, tricky as well. Referendum itself clearly takes a good couple of months, and in any case, it looks like this is why, of course, this whole timeline is why we're talking about there being a delay to the actual revocation of Article 50 date of the end of March. And it does, to my mind, look quite likely, whatever happens, that date will get moved. I would think Europe could deal with 4 to 6 weeks. Any longer than that, it starts to get complicated for the European parliamentary, when the new MEPs take their seats, and of course starts to make a mockery of the whole process anyway. But the one point I'd like to make about the timeline that could work and that could break the deadlock and that could resolve these factions coming together is if the government falls to a no confidence motion, you get 14 calendar days to form a new government before you default to an election. That's your Superman moment. That is your government in crisis. No one can lead. I tell you what, I will do a deal with the SNP plus some of the DUP plus some Conservatives, and we will get ourselves to a position of a customs union, for example. That's going to be when the momentum really counts. And I think they're all aware that because we're close to Christmas, the key swing vote always is public opinion. Can you take the public with you? Nobody's going to thank anybody for dissolving, completely forcing hand of the government before Christmas. So that's where the timeline becomes central. So I'm going to, before I hand over on Ireland, I'm going to just talk again about those 3 points, why the vote is being pulled. Number one, running scared. Fall of the government is possible. This just goes to show you that 14 days I've talked about could easily become a reality in the next 4 to 6 weeks. 2, time is against them. So being aware of this 21 days after the meaningful vote, that is going to kick in at some point. So again, next 4 to 6 weeks, complete crunch period for how and when and if we will leave. And the third, yes, working on an alternative. Again, they don't have much time for that, but maybe there is a way of pulling together a lot of these strands and effectively saying, we've renegotiated something, the backstop's shifted slightly, and by the way, if you don't do this, Labour putting in a no confidence motion, that's going to lead to Corbyn, you've got to vote for this. And it basically really fronts up to the rebels within the Conservative Party. So those are the 3 reasons to look at why this vote has been pulled and why this doesn't really stop a crisis. And I would also say that the SNP's Nicola Sturgeon has already said, as has Chris Leslie, Labour MP, we should put in a vote of no confidence in this government because they seem to be so much struggling to govern. So although they may think they are delaying a crisis, they may in fact be making it much worse and much more likely, because you could bring a government, you could bring a no confidence vote every single day from now until Brexit if you really wanted to. But the key people on that are going to be the DUP. And my colleague here now is going to talk about the DUP. So BallyMoney, Richard, is a member of the Orange Order and the Apprentice Boys of Derry. You can Wikipedia it if you don't know what that is. And a Conservative Party member. He has previously been a member of the Ulster Unionist Party and the Royal Black Institution. And although he comes from County Antrim, the heartland of Ian Paisley, he is not a DUP man. He's lived in London 30 years and he voted to remain. So he has a good handle on all sides of the unionist debate. And we're just going to now, talk about the DUP, and then we'll hand it on for questions. So first of all, what is the DUP's goal?
The DUP's goal, obviously Democratic Unionist Party, as any unionist party, their goal is to maintain the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That is their goal. Okay, so
in voting for any kind of deal, versus Jeremy Corbyn, which way do they go?
They will take into account the maintenance of the union and whether or not they could be blamed for not guarding it safely enough.
So at the moment, as it stands, they've said they do not like this backstop.
Nope.
And why don't they like it?
Because it ties us more closely to ERA than it does the rest of the United Kingdom.
But that's only in the backstop situation. So that means, okay, we may not have a trade. We could have a trade deal in 18 months, or at least the boundaries of one.
But if it goes wrong,
yeah,
the DUP cannot be seen to have been part of that process.
No. So today, with her delaying the vote, what do you think DUP will think about that?
The backstop's going.
So they'll be hopeful that this does mean a renegotiation.
I would imagine that's exactly what they're thinking. I would imagine that's very possibly what she's trying to do, because there are Conservative MPs who want the backstop going.
Yes, absolutely. And when I said that 45 MPs had cited the backstop as a reason not to vote for the deal, that doesn't even include 10 DUP MPs who you could also gain back potentially. Well, why have the EU insisted on this backstop?
Well, in my mind, because they want to in some way harm the United Kingdom. But obviously doing that economically would harm the rest of Europe, so breaking up union is the easiest way to do it.
Well, sorry, what do you mean it would be bad for the European Union?
Well, a hard Brexit is going to hurt the UK, but it will also hurt the rest of Europe. I mean, GDP will go down.
Okay, so
therefore, a way of doing that without hurting the rest of Europe is to hurt the UK just unilaterally.
So Boris Johnson's written an article in the Telegraph today saying, so Michael Gove has obviously been trying to be the Brexiteer in chief in cabinet, saying that the backstop would harm the EU as much as it would harm Great Britain, United Kingdom, in fact. So they'll never activate it. They don't want it either. But Boris Johnson today said, well, if they don't want it and we don't want it,
then why
is it in there?
There we go.
Do you think that resonates?
I do.
So will the EU give way?
Unsure, but I think they might. The thing is, I mean, maybe we've just decided and agreed to stay within the customs, within the single market. Maybe that's what she's going to do.
You think
United Kingdom?
The whole of the United Kingdom stay closer to Europe.
Yeah.
Well, there is two levels to this backstop.
Yeah.
There's a UK-wide customs union, and then there's the Northern Ireland.
So we just do the UK-wide.
And would that be all right for the DUP?
I believe so. Yes.
And if the EU don't give way,
that's a hard Brexit and a hard border.
And what does that mean? Who's going to impose the hard border?
Interesting. Who is going to impose a hard border? I guess because of where the WTO, the UK will have to in some way impose some hard border, and so will ERA. But when a hard border, I know people hark back to whenever I was in security forces, the border was there to find terrorists, not to find hidden video recorders necessarily. So this will be there as a customs union. I mean, to break the customs union, it'll be there to find those sort of things. But do we need the hard border as I remember it? I find that unlikely.
And so,
but the one thing I will say, the other issue, the border is kind of a manifestation of kind of the breakdown in the Belfast Agreement and us leaving the EU.
Okay.
Because the Belfast Agreement, it was all about rights and equality and compensation to a certain extent. So, for instance, the Human Rights Act of 1998 could be disapplied under EU law. So if we do leave, it's possible that we have broken some of those agreements as such that we made in the Belfast Agreement.
Sorry, if we do leave the EU,
yes,
then some elements of the Belfast Agreement are,
I guess, broken to a certain extent. Now the thing is, it was never even thought about that we would leave the EU. That was the issue.
Of course, no, not in 1998.
No, and therefore, and there is creative ambiguity. In fact, that's the term used, creative ambiguity, because if you read the Belfast Agreement, it's not that long, but it's pretty intricate. And because of that, the words used are somewhat difficult. I mean, I would interpret it a different way than a nationalist, for instance.
Okay, very clever way of getting both sides around the table.
But I say the border is only one manifestation of this, and it's the quickest one to manifest itself. If this all does fall apart, then there will be more.
Well, you obviously lived through the height of the Troubles. Are you concerned that violence could return, or is that overblown? I
would be massively surprised if it did.
If there were a
But
hard
what-
border, or if there had to be a as you say, physical manifestation. Because we can have a hard border apparently with various technological solutions.
Yeah, and I think that's what we'll have to do. And I think in reality, nobody, ERA nor us, will want to impose a hard border. But we'll have to keep Europe happy, and well, for us, the WTO. So we'll put in some sort of border that will be hard enough.
So, as it sounds for DUP at the moment, they're clearly aware that they could bring down the government.
Yes, and they would.
And they would because
They're maintaining the union.
they're maintaining the union.
And they're seen to be maintaining the union. They'll bring down anybody.
Yes. Now, people often
If
say
your family have almost been murdered by somebody, bringing down the government is the least of their worries.
Yes, I did actually see a DUP MP talk about that. I think he said, you know, when you've been bombed and shot at, you don't really worry too much about the threats of some people in Westminster.
It's intransigence. It's part of them. It's not a ploy. It's not play. It's just that.
Exactly, they're playing this with a straight bat.
That's the way it is.
Right.
As regards the union.
Right. Got you. Okay. Well, we have talked for about 25 minutes. I'm going to get Sam back in the room because he's very good at organising the technology to see if anyone has any questions. We're going to unmute everybody's phones. So if anybody would now like to ask us a question, feel free. Or has anyone sent us a chat question? Oh, we have had some questions. Okay, we've got a question here with regard to the backstop. How about they put new language in the backstop which clarifies no side can force the other to remain in the backstop if it does not want to be? What does it say after that? They could agree a process by which they could exit and possibly also open up the choice of future relationships, Norway style, EEA, Canada, etc. So I always love this because I always love the business people and the market's way of looking at these things. And I think we often see it really clearly. Like even you, as a Remainer, have said, you said about 2 weeks after the vote, well, let's just go.
Yes.
Let's just go, let's just leave. Let's not pay any money, let's not get into these negotiations, which of course have stymied and clogged up our system for 2 years. The thing is that politics isn't really about what works, it's much more about what sells. And so putting new language into the backstop that would mean kind of it's an insurance policy, but you know, it only gets activated under, what was that? How would you even agree to that? How about they put new language? Oh yeah, you don't have to stay in if you don't want to, but then it's not a backstop. That's the problem. And they were pretty clear that the backstop was what it had to be to make sure that there was this frictionless border in Northern Ireland. But you're saying that maybe just have a hard border. What's the problem?
Yes.
Is that a problem?
Not for me. But it is for other people, and they completely not really accept.
But is that a problem for them economically?
Well, economically, it would be a problem. It would be for ERA, and I say, according to Belfast Agreement, we said it would come again, but it's not the hard border that I remember. That's what I would say.
Have we had any more questions? Oh, we've got big capitals.
Hi, Helen.
Oh, hello.
Hi,
who's
Helen.
that?
Hi, Rich. How you doing? It's Blair here from AFI. How are you?
Oh, hello, Blair.
Hello there.
Hello. So, yeah, thank you very much. That was very interesting. But for me, the main point of the negotiation is to be able to have the ability to walk away at the end if you don't like the deal. And Theresa May has gone above and beyond to try and perhaps naively keep everyone happy. And if she has this vote, and obviously everyone's expecting her to lose and loses the vote, then she can clearly and tangibly demonstrate that the deal that was initially tried for isn't possible and can then legitimately walk away. What is so catastrophically awful that she can't do this?
So sorry, you're saying that, or it seems to be that you're suggesting walking away is still an option for her and maybe a sensible one.
Yes, it seems to solve a lot of problems. She can demonstrate that she's tried. She can then demonstrate that she's tried to appease all the necessary parties that she needs to appease to try and get the vote through, and that's not possible. Why can't she then just walk away from the deal and hold her head high and say, we did our very best, let's move on to the next option?
Well, I Yeah, again, I think this is you sitting there with a business hat on, and I agree with you. I think that would be a good strategy, and maybe that is what she's going to say at 3:30. But it's the inexorable timeline that's the issue. You know, that point about we are on the train track to 29th of March leading. So if she does walk away completely and we go into no deal whatsoever, well, then she loses the support of all the soft Brexiteers plus all the Remainers, and she can't keep Parliament together then either. And this is the problem, kind of every which way she turns, really. But you're right in the sense that at some stage that has to be forced, doesn't it? It has to be forced. But the strange thing to me is, why not have the vote, then go to Brussels and say, well, obviously I couldn't get it done. Well, the problem she's got now is, I can't get this done and my government might fall, which seems to be a way of saying, come on then, force the government out, which seems quite a risky strategy when everybody's not very keen on it. Do you have a point on that?
Well, I must say, I'm guessing. I mean, obviously, who knows what's going through their minds? But she probably realised it could be catastrophic. Today, maybe she realised, or she was told today, it could be catastrophic. Yep. The end of the government, a change of government, and they've all decided to, well, rather than go into that, try and go back to the authorities in Europe and come up with a different deal that would go through.
And well, say what Blair said, and if you don't, then I will have no choice but to go down the no deal path because there's no other option. She may well do. I've had a question here. What is your forecast for sterling dollar cable, given the various outcomes that could play out? Orderly, disorderly, etc. Well, I don't know if all of you will have seen my note from this morning, but clearly, to my mind, the risks for sterling are huge, even on some kind of resolution, because we're not going to get the resolution without an awful lot more problems before we get there. So I would already say this is negative for sterling to the tune of maybe 10% down. But I would add to that the bigger market vulnerabilities right now. You know, we had huge moves in oil, US rates, stocks. There's negative gamma everywhere. We're going into the most illiquid point of the year, and all the other big moves we've had this year, from the VIX to Italy to Russia to Turkey, they happened at illiquid moments. Like Italy's big problems came after the holidays in May. Facebook went down over the Easter holiday, and they have come on risks that we already knew about, really. Like, you're not going to tell me that the Italian anti-establishment government wasn't going to go on some kind of collision course with the EU. I mean, that's fairly obvious. So it just seems to me that this is all negative for sterling because we have a government that doesn't function, whatever happens, and also illiquidity and a risk that it seems to me very few people are positioned for. So I'm honestly looking for cable to make new lows in the next 2 months.
Yeah, I must say, I'm flabbergasted to think that any good news will come out in the short term. Maybe just get news that's, whatever. You know, we kick the can a couple of weeks down the road, perhaps. What does that do? Maybe not very much. It's not positive, is it?
No. And how is delaying it doing anything other than...
And actually, I know your question on there about delaying. I mean, maybe the delay it from March. I don't know.
Well, I'd delay Article 50.
Yeah.
But that's all that buys you a bit more time to solidify the issues. The issues need to come out into the open to be solved. Will the UK have to implement sterling capital controls in the event of no deal? I think we should put that on our. I think we should put that on our radar. And I am not a perma-bear hysterical person, for those who know me, but we have to look at this through the lens of emerging markets. If you were in a country that had no functioning government, huge political instability, renegotiating with its biggest trade partner, and a deficit, and interest rates that are frankly too low for the risks that are ahead, I can easily see a lower currency, higher interest rate scenario, just as you would get in any emerging market country. I'm not saying Britain is Turkey, but there should be a little dose of Turkey thrown in. What do you think?
At this moment in time, yes.
Why would the EU be willing to make any changes to the backstop? Surely in their interests to either make things worse for Britain politically or force a second referendum. That is one thing, pick up on Blair's question there about just walking away. It may well be that the EU say, well, another way for you to solve this is have another referendum. And I think they would delay Article 50 if there were preparations put in place for a new referendum or a general election, actually. They're not totally mad about not letting a country proceed on its democratic path. But it is a good point. Why would the EU be willing to make a change to the backstop? You mean you think they are, Richard?
I mean, yes. If there's if we give something else away or whatever it may be.
So okay, yeah, maybe, and of course, no deal is not really great for them either.
And no deal is not good for anybody. Let's be honest about that. It's not tremendous.
Is there another question about that?
Yes.
I thought Graham was saying all they're remaining in transition. True. Labour won't seek a no confidence vote before the deal review. Interesting. So they're planning on leaving it for now. Any more? No. Okay. Any more questions before we let you get on with your day? Anything else you want to say to wrap up?
No, I would just say, I mean, obviously you've heard this. Feel free to contact us in any other way you'd like to afterwards, and we'll happily talk to you about.
Yes, we can talk to you about specifics for you. We've just had a final question, a final comment. There is no appetite from the UK politicians for hard Brexit, hence the amendment. I would just be really careful about these comments on what there is a majority or an appetite for, because I'll tell you the biggest thing I find from talking to investors out there, people either have no position or some sort of option on sterling going higher because they think there will be a breakout of sanity. Usually that is absolutely true for people in Britain and British politicians, but if there is one subject Britain goes insane about and always has, it's Europe. So that, to my mind, is why I can only see more mayhem from here, more delays, more stalemate, more unpredictability, and therefore why it's negative for sterling and for UK assets.
Yeah, I see your replies there. Yeah, you say there's no appetite. I'm not entirely sure there's no appetite. I think that's one of the issues. There's no appetite. It's obviously not massive, but there is some. But if push came to shove, some people go, right, that's it, we're done.
I've got some Remainer friends of mine who are like, right, let's just not even bother. Let's just go.
I met.
Why are we paying 39 billion? Let's go.
I met some at the weekend who were exactly the same.
It's taking too long. Oh, right, hang on, I've got another question. Does the CDU vote have an impact on Macron being weak? Is the European reformist movement populism more organised? What's the end of it say? Does this mean the EU have to take a tough line on the UK over Brexit to discourage other separatists? Well, there is something certainly to be said for the swathe of the swathe of anti-establishment sentiment going through Europe, and there is big change coming. Macron's in trouble. Italy are on the up, but have a difficult government, and yes, Germany is changing. Absolutely, these European elections coming up in May are going to be quite significant for the direction of Europe. Oh, what's your view of the general public? A BBC interview with ordinary voters said, get on with it, and does anybody still care about Brexit?
Yeah.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Yeah, we're reaching, every issue has some sort of finite time in people's minds, and we're getting to the end of it. I'm with you.
Well, there's one of our close organisations we work with called Delta Poll, a chap called Joe Twyman who works there, ex-YouGov. The one consistent reading from all of their polling is get on with it, which is both good and bad for the politicians. As I said, they need momentum. They need momentum to get through, bring these factions together and deliver something. And so, but people could sell Norway as getting on with it.
Yeah.
They could sell walking away with no deal as getting on with it.
Yeah.
The thing they'll find difficult to sell as getting on with it is a referendum.
Yes.
Which is why I think a referendum is very unlikely, and also a general election is very unlikely, because that's not getting on with it either. I think they only use that no confidence vote to potentially reshuffle the cards in that 14-day period to, sort of steal a majority. Actually, do you know what? It could even happen without a no confidence vote, because government only exists as long as it has the majority of the confidence of the House. If 20 Labour MPs and 50 Tory MPs said we're driving this and this is what we're going to go towards, and the rest of you can pick it or leave it, and then it's split Parliament. That's another way to get a solution as well, but it's coming. Oh, someone said a final point. Surely the bet is that May's deal will get through sheer public fatigue. I wouldn't bet on it, because although they need to listen to public opinion, these 650 MPs are now in the most important position of their political lives, in fact of their entire lives probably. So don't underestimate their desire to make a difference, and for some of them genuinely ideologically this is the thing they have been waiting for. For those who couldn't vote in 1973, 74, when we went in, they've literally waited their entire lives to reverse this. Equally, those people who think that this was a Russian conspiracy disaster that led people to do crazy things, they cannot concede that we can actually leave. I mean, there's just such a degree of obsession about this with the politicians that they will still, and you know what? Tony Blair, Margaret Thatcher, the big leaders, the good communicators, they shape public opinion. They don't wait for public opinion to come to them. And the one rogue wild card I would keep an eye on is the news this weekend, of course, that Nigel Farage ripped up his UKIP membership and he's starting a new anti...
yeah, I know Nigel Farage supporter, but the thing is he communicates well and he sounds well at times. And
he has been one of the most effective politicians in the last 25 years. He founded a party out of nowhere on trying to leave the EU. He got a referendum. He got the Leave vote. He's not going to go silently into the night now. And much as we might not like it, these are people we have to pay some attention to.
Yes.
Should we just unmute everyone for a final time in case there's a final question? No.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you. We're going to send this out to everybody, and we'll do a recording. And please do circulate it and let us.
And as I say, contact us wherever you want, anytime you want.
Yes.
We're here.
We're ready. Thank you.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.